Sarah Miller stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her San Francisco apartment. Behind her, the blue light of her smartphone cast an eerie glow in the pre-dawn darkness. Another sleepless night scrolling through endless feeds of other people's curated lives. At 32, she had everything society told her to want. A prestigious marketing job, a stylish apartment, financial stability. Yet an inexplicable emptiness had settled into her chest, growing heavier each day. Outside her window, the city was beginning to stir. The tech campus where she worked would soon be buzzing with ambitious professionals just like her, all chasing the next promotion, the next achievement, the next validation. Sarah had once found purpose in this pursuit, but lately she'd been haunted by a persistent question. Is this really all there is? Her therapist had recently suggested reading Carl Jung, handing her a worn copy of Modern Man in Search of a Soul. The book had sat untouched on her nightstand for weeks. Another day, she whispered to herself, splashing cold water on her face. The routine was familiar. Coffee, commute, meetings, lunch at her desk, more meetings, takeout dinner, Netflix, sleep. Somewhere along the way, the days had begun to blur together. Sarah couldn't pinpoint exactly when the feeling of disconnection had started, but she recognized its symptoms. The constant distraction, the difficulty being present, the vague sense that something essential was missing. Her phone buzzed with a notification, her boss already sending emails at 5:30 a.m. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she read the message requesting she come in early to prepare for an important client meeting. She'd canceled plans with friends 3 times this month for similar emergencies. When was the last time she'd had a real conversation that wasn't about work or filtered through a screen? The morning commute was a blur of faces illuminated by phone screens. Sarah observed how everyone seemed physically present yet mentally elsewhere. Jung had called this the sickness of our age. The split between the conscious and unconscious mind, the rational and the intuitive. Modern society had elevated reason, efficiency, and external achievement above all else, while the deeper needs of the psyche went unaddressed. In the sleek conference room, Sarah delivered her presentation flawlessly. Her colleagues nodded approvingly as she outlined the marketing strategy that would help their client connect authentically with consumers. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, an expert at manufacturing connection for brands while feeling profoundly disconnected herself. As she spoke about emotional engagement, she wondered when she had last felt genuinely engaged with her own emotions. During lunch, Sarah found herself drawn to the book in her bag. Opening to a random page, her eyes fell on a passage. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. She paused, the words resonating with unexpected force. Was her growing sense of emptiness an inner situation she had been avoiding? What might happen if she continued to ignore it? The afternoon dragged on with meetings that could have been emails, and emails that demanded immediate responses. By 6 o'clock, Sarah felt drained, not from meaningful work, but from the constant fragmentation of her attention. Jung had written about the modern person's alienation from their deeper self, how the demands of civilization pulled us away from our instinctual wisdom, our connection to meaning, our authentic being. Walking home through the bustling financial district, Sarah noticed how everyone seemed to be rushing, always rushing towards some destination that never quite satisfied once reached. She remembered another line from Jung. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a stirring of curiosity about what she might find if she truly looked inward. That night, instead of reaching for her phone, Sarah picked up Jung's book. As she read about the modern soul's hunger for meaning in a mechanized world, tears welled unexpectedly. The words on the page seemed to articulate something she had felt but couldn't name. A longing not for more success or possessions, but for wholeness, for connection to something larger than herself, for a life that honored both the rational mind and the symbolic soul. The tech campus gleamed in the California sunshine, a monument to innovation and forward thinking. Glass and steel structures housed thousands of brilliant minds working to build the future, as the company slogan proudly declared. Sarah sat in the courtyard during her lunch break, Jung's book open on her lap, increasingly aware of the contradiction between this temple of progress and her growing inner turmoil. "What are you reading?" Michael, a colleague from the design team, dropped into the seat across from her. Unlike most people at the company, Michael seemed genuinely present in conversations, his eyes focused rather than darting to the nearest screen. Sarah showed him the book cover somewhat self-consciously. "Jung?" "Heavy stuff for a lunch break," he smiled. "I studied psychology before switching to design. Jung understood something essential about humans that we seem to have forgotten." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on Jung's ideas about the shadow, those parts of ourselves we repress or deny, and how modern society encouraged people to identify solely with their productive, successful, rational aspects, while disowning their limitations, vulnerabilities, and darker impulses. "Look around," Michael gestured to the campus. "We've created a culture that celebrates constant optimization, disruption, efficiency. But what happens to the messy, irrational, emotional parts of being human?" As if on cue, Sarah's phone lit up with an urgent message from her boss. "I have to go," she said reluctantly, feeling the familiar pull of obligation. Michael nodded understandingly. Jung would say that's the collective shadow at work. The more we try to be perfectly efficient and productive, the more our need for depth and meaning asserts itself in other ways. Maybe that's why anxiety and depression rates keep climbing, despite all our progress. Back at her desk, Sarah found it difficult to focus. The conversation with Michael had stirred something in her. She opened her browser and typed, "Carl Jung Collective Shadow Modern Society." Articles and videos populated her screen. Discussions of how technological advancement had outpaced psychological understanding, creating a world of external connection but internal isolation. One video particularly caught her attention. Carl Jung versus the modern world. That evening, instead of her usual takeout and Netflix routine, Sarah sat on her small balcony watching the video. The narrator explained how Jung had predicted many of the psychological crises of our time: the epidemic of meaninglessness, the spiritual hunger in a materialistic world, the disorientation that comes from losing connection with our deeper selves and ancestral wisdom. Jung believed that what appears as external crisis is often a reflection of internal imbalance, the narrator explained. Our collective shadow, what we've repressed in our pursuit of progress, returns as fate. Sarah thought about her own life, how she had pursued success according to external metrics while neglecting her inner world. She had achieved everything she was supposed to want, yet felt increasingly hollow. Was this the return of the repressed Jung had written about? The parts of herself she had ignored in her climb up the corporate ladder, now manifesting as this persistent emptiness? The next morning, Sarah woke before her alarm. Instead of immediately checking her phone, she sat in silence for a few minutes, observing the quality of her thoughts, the sensations in her body. Jung had emphasized the importance of this kind of self-awareness, not as self-improvement, but as a way to become acquainted with the full range of one's being. It felt uncomfortable at first, like exercising an atrophied muscle. At work, Sarah noticed patterns she hadn't seen before, how conversations revolved around optimization and growth, rarely touching on meaning or purpose. How people spoke proudly of working through weekends and vacations. How the language of technology, upgrade, process, interface, had infiltrated discussions about human relationships and experiences. Jung had warned about the psychic cost of this mechanistic worldview, how it alienated people from their deeper nature. During a strategy meeting, Sarah's boss unveiled plans for an AI tool that would eliminate inefficiencies in consumer targeting. As colleagues nodded enthusiastically, Sarah found herself asking, but what about the human element? Are we solving a real problem or just creating more distance between people? The question hung awkwardly in the air. Her boss recovered quickly. The human element is precisely why we need this tool. It frees people from mundane tasks so they can focus on creative work. Walking home that evening, Sarah reflected on the meeting. Jung had described how modern institutions often used rational arguments to justify decisions that actually served unconscious needs and fears. The company's relentless pursuit of efficiency masked a deeper anxiety, the fear of falling behind, of becoming irrelevant, of facing the limitations inherent in being human. And she had been complicit in this collective avoidance, throwing herself into work partly to escape the discomfort of her own existential questions. As darkness fell over San Francisco, Sarah found herself drawn to a small bookstore she had passed countless times but never entered. Inside, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to her digital-dominated life. Quiet, thoughtful, slightly dusty. In the psychology section, she discovered more of Jung's works and books by his contemporaries and followers. The elderly shopkeeper noticed her interest. Jung understood something essential, he said, echoing Michael's words from earlier, that the crisis of our time is not political or economic, but spiritual. We've lost connection with what makes us human. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah first opened Jung's book, and subtle shifts had begun to appear in her life. She had started a journal, recording not just daily events, but dreams, random thoughts, emotional patterns. Jung had emphasized the importance of this practice, creating a dialogue between the conscious and unconscious mind. Her dreams, previously forgotten upon waking, now revealed themselves as strange but meaningful landscapes populated by familiar faces and unfamiliar roles. One dream in particular had stayed with her. She was lost in a vast modernist building, all glass and sharp angles, searching for something important. Each room contained only screens showing different aspects of her life: work achievements, social media profiles, bank statements. A voice kept announcing optimization in progress as she grew increasingly desperate. Then suddenly a door appeared that hadn't been there before. Old, wooden, out of place among the sleek surfaces. When she opened it, she found not another room but a forest, wild and alive. She woke with tears on her face. The forest represents your unconscious, Michael suggested when she described the dream during their now regular lunch conversations. Jung would say it's the part of you that's been neglected in your focus on external success, the wild, uncontrolled, natural aspects of your psyche calling for attention. Sarah nodded, remembering Jung's writings about the symbolic language of dreams and how they often compensated for conscious attitudes that had become too one-sided. That weekend, instead of catching up on work as usual, Sarah drove north to Muir Woods. Walking among the ancient redwoods, she felt a strange sense of recognition, as if the forest from her dream had materialized around her. The cathedral-like silence, broken only by birdsong and the soft sound of wind through branches, created space for thoughts and feelings that had no room in her usual environment. Jung had often written about nature as a mirror for the psyche, how disconnection from the natural world paralleled disconnection from our own nature. Sitting on a fallen log, Sarah reflected on how different this experience was from her digital life. Here there was no optimization, no efficiency, no metrics for success. Just the slow, patient growth of trees that had stood for centuries, the intricate relationships between species, the natural cycles of death and renewal. Jung had criticized modern society's obsession with progress and growth that acknowledged no limits, contrasting it with nature's wisdom of balance and seasonality. Back in the city, the contrast was jarring. Sarah noticed how the urban environment reflected collective psychological patterns, the emphasis on speed, novelty, constant stimulation. Even the architecture seemed to embody certain values: transparency, efficiency, control. Jung had written about how physical structures often expressed unconscious psychological structures, how the cities we built revealed the minds that conceived them. At work the following Monday, Sarah found herself increasingly at odds with the prevailing culture. During a brainstorming session about a new campaign targeting Gen Z consumers, she raised questions about ethical implications. Are we solving a real need or creating artificial insecurities to sell products? Her colleagues seemed taken aback by this perspective. One of them laughed nervously. That's Marketing 101, Sarah. Has someone been reading too much philosophy lately? The comment stung, but it also clarified something for Sarah. Jung had described how individuals who began to question collective values often faced resistance or ridicule, the group unconsciously working to maintain its shared illusions. She was experiencing firsthand the tension between individual authenticity and collective adaptation that Jung had written about extensively. That evening, Sarah met with a small group Michael had introduced her to, people from various backgrounds who gathered monthly to discuss Jung's ideas and their applications to contemporary life. The topic was individuation in the digital age, how to pursue psychological wholeness in an environment that fragmented attention and commodified identity. Sarah listened, fascinated, as others shared their experiences of trying to live more integrated lives amid the pressures of modern society. Jung believed that individuation, becoming your whole, authentic self, was the purpose of human life, explained Elena, a therapist in the group. But our culture makes this incredibly difficult. We're encouraged to develop a marketable persona, to brand ourselves, to fit into systems rather than to integrate our contradictions and complexities. Others nodded in recognition. Sarah thought about her own carefully curated professional image, how much energy it took to maintain, and how little it reflected her full humanity. As she walked home under a rare starry sky, Sarah felt both unsettled and strangely hopeful. Jung had described this phase of the individuation process, when old certainties fall away but new understanding hasn't yet crystallized, as a necessary dark night of the soul. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time in years she felt she was asking the right questions. The emptiness that had haunted her wasn't an absence to be filled with more achievement or distraction, but a space clearing for something new to emerge. The quarterly review meeting dragged into its third hour. Executives presented growth projections, market analyses, optimization strategies, all illustrated with upward trending graphs. Sarah observed the proceedings with new eyes, seeing not just the content, but the unconscious dynamics at play. The ritualistic nature of these meetings, the specialized language, the unquestioned assumptions, Jung might have described it all as a modern manifestation of tribal religion, complete with its own mythology of endless growth and technological salvation. And now, Sarah will present the new consumer engagement strategy, her boss announced. Sarah stood, suddenly aware of a choice point. She could deliver the expected presentation, data-driven, optimistic, reinforcing the company narrative. Or she could speak from a more authentic place, integrating her evolving perspective. Taking a deep breath, she chose the latter path. Before I share the strategy, I'd like us to consider a fundamental question. What actual human need are we addressing? Not market opportunity, human need. A subtle shift occurred in the room. Puzzlement, slight discomfort, but also a quality of attention, different from the glazed compliance of earlier presentations. Sarah continued, Carl Jung, the psychologist, believed that beneath our individual consciousness lies a collective unconscious, shared patterns and needs that connect all humans across time and cultures. One of these fundamental needs is for meaning and authentic connection, which our current digital environment often fails to satisfy. She proceeded to outline a strategy that honored both business objectives and deeper psychological insights, focusing on how their products could facilitate genuine human connection rather than exploiting insecurities or encouraging addiction. To her surprise, the response was not dismissal but engagement. Several executives asked thoughtful questions. Others shared personal observations about technology's double-edged impact on their own lives and relationships. After the meeting, her boss pulled her aside. "That was unexpected," he said, his expression unreadable. "But you've given us something to think about. Not everyone will be comfortable with this perspective, but I think it's a conversation we need to have." Sarah nodded, recognizing that she had taken a risk by bringing Jung's insights into this corporate temple. But something had shifted. A small crack had appeared in the collective certainty, allowing new questions to emerge. That evening, Sarah met Michael for dinner at a small restaurant in North Beach. The neighborhood's old-world charm offered a welcome contrast to the sleek modernism of their workplace. Over pasta and wine, they discussed the meeting and the broader implications of bringing depth psychology into contemporary institutions. Jung believed that social transformation begins with individual consciousness, Michael said. When enough people start questioning collective assumptions, the culture itself begins to shift. Sarah shared her growing understanding of Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, how beneath the surface of our rational individual minds lay shared patterns, symbols, and instincts that connected all humanity. It's like we're all drawing from the same deep well, she explained, but our modern consciousness has built elaborate structures to separate us from this source. We've gained technological mastery but lost connection with ancient wisdom. Walking through the city afterward, they passed homeless encampments alongside luxury condominiums, a stark illustration of the shadow side of progress that society preferred not to see. Jung had written extensively about how what is denied at the collective level doesn't disappear but manifests as social problems, environmental crises, psychological epidemics. The growing rates of depression, anxiety, and addiction in America weren't separate from its economic and technological success, but intimately connected to it. The next day, Sarah received an unexpected email from the company's founder, requesting a meeting to discuss her presentation. With some trepidation, she arrived at his office, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. To her surprise, his bookshelf contained several volumes on psychology, philosophy, and wisdom traditions. "Your perspective yesterday caught my attention," he began. "I started this company with genuine idealism, believing technology could solve human problems. But lately, I've been questioning whether we're creating as many problems as we're solving." Their conversation ranged widely, from Jung's warnings about technological advancement outpacing psychological understanding, to the founder's personal journey from idealism to disillusionment, to searching for a more integrated approach. "The systems we've built reflect our collective consciousness," he acknowledged. "If we want different outcomes, we need to operate from a different level of awareness." He shared his vision for evolving the company's approach, asking for Sarah's input on how Jungian insights might inform a more humane technological future. As she left the meeting, Sarah felt a sense of cautious hope. Jung had emphasized that genuine change required acknowledging both light and shadow, the constructive and destructive potentials in any human endeavor. Technology itself wasn't the problem. It was the unconscious attitudes and unexamined values driving its development and use. By bringing these into awareness, new possibilities could emerge. That weekend, Sarah attended a workshop on technology and the soul at the Jung Institute in San Francisco. The facilitator, a Jungian analyst who had previously worked in Silicon Valley, led discussions about how digital tools were reshaping human consciousness, relationships, and identity. Jung would see our technological environment as an externalization of psychic processes, she explained. Our devices reflect our desire for connection, knowledge, transcendence, but they can't fulfill these deeper needs if we use them unconsciously. Participants shared personal experiences, how social media triggered comparison and inadequacy, how constant connectivity eroded boundaries between work and rest, how algorithmic curation narrowed rather than expanded worldviews. But they also explored constructive possibilities, how technology might serve individuation rather than impede it, how digital tools could be designed with psychological wholeness in mind, how virtual spaces might complement rather than replace embodied community. On Sunday afternoon, Sarah hiked to a viewpoint overlooking the city. The panorama of human achievement spread before her. Bridges spanning impossible distances, buildings reaching toward the sky, invisible networks connecting millions of lives. Jung had never rejected modernity or advocated returning to the past. Instead, he had called for integration, honoring the achievements of rational consciousness while reconnecting with the wisdom of the unconscious, creating a more complete vision of human potential and purpose. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the bay, Sarah felt a sense of her place in a larger story. Jung had described individuation not as separation from others, but as discovering one's unique contribution to the collective. Her growing awareness wasn't pulling her away from society, but potentially helping her serve it in a more conscious way. The emptiness that had haunted her was transforming into a creative space from which new possibilities could emerge, not just for her individual life, but for the communities and systems she was part of. 6 months had passed since Sarah first opened Jung's book. The changes in her life had been subtle yet profound, less a dramatic external transformation than a shift in consciousness that altered how she experienced and engaged with the world. Her apartment looked much the same, but now contained evidence of her inner journey. A journal filled with dreams and reflections, books on depth psychology lining her shelves, a small altar with objects from nature that held personal significance. Her relationship with technology had evolved. She still used digital tools, but with greater intentionality, setting boundaries around work communications, taking regular digital Sabbaths, choosing applications that served her values rather than exploited her attention. Jung had written about the importance of conscious relationship with the tools and systems humans create, neither rejecting modern innovations nor being unconsciously ruled by them, but integrating them into a life guided by deeper wisdom. At work, Sarah had become a quiet catalyst for change. The conversation she had started about human needs and technological design had spread through the company, influencing product development and marketing approaches. A small but growing group of colleagues now met regularly to discuss ethical implications of their work. The founder had implemented a wisdom council that included not just technical experts but philosophers, psychologists, and cultural critics to provide perspective on the company's direction. "You've created quite a ripple effect," Michael commented as they walked through a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. Unlike their previous habit of working through weekends, they now prioritized experiences that nourished body and soul. Time in nature, community events, creative pursuits. Jung had emphasized the importance of embodied living in an increasingly virtual world, how connection with physical reality grounded psychological development. Sarah smiled, selecting fresh produce from a local farm. "It's not really me creating the effect. Jung would say I'm just making conscious something that was already stirring in the collective unconscious. People are hungry for meaning, for authentic connection, for a way of living that honors the full spectrum of human experience. The emptiness I felt was never just my personal problem. It reflects a collective wound in our culture." Later that day, Sarah led a workshop at a community center in the Mission District. Reconnecting with soul in a digital age? What had begun as informal conversations with friends had evolved into a regular gathering, where people from diverse backgrounds explored how to live with greater psychological wholeness amid modern pressures. Today's discussion focused on Jung's concept of the persona, the social mask we present to others, and how digital environments often reinforced rather than transcended these limited self-presentations. Jung believed that genuine community requires us to meet beyond our personas, Sarah explained to the circle of attentive faces. Not by pretending we don't have social roles and identities, but by recognizing they're just one aspect of our fuller humanity. Online spaces often encourage us to curate and perfect our personas, rather than risk the vulnerability of authentic presence. Participants nodded in recognition, sharing their own experiences of the gap between digital self-presentation and lived reality. A young tech worker raised his hand. "But isn't this just privileged people complaining about the tools that have connected billions and created unprecedented opportunity? Jung's ideas seem relevant, mainly to those who already have their basic needs met." The question hung in the air, challenging but honest. Sarah appreciated its directness. Jung himself had wrestled with questions about the universality and accessibility of his approach. "That's an important perspective," Sarah acknowledged. Jung would be the first to say that material security matters. It's hard to focus on psychological integration when you're struggling for survival. But he would also point out that technological progress alone doesn't address the full spectrum of human needs. Even as material conditions improve globally, rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness are rising across socioeconomic levels. Something essential is missing from our model of progress. The conversation deepened, exploring how Jung's insights might apply across different cultural and economic contexts, not as a universal prescription, but as an invitation to honor both collective wisdom and individual experience. By the session's end, no neat conclusions had been reached, but a richer understanding had emerged through the dialogue itself, a process Jung might have recognized as collective individuation. That evening, Sarah received a call from her mother in Ohio. Their relationship had been strained for years, her mother never quite understanding Sarah's drive to succeed in the competitive tech world, Sarah impatient with what she had perceived as her mother's limited horizons. But as Sarah's perspective had shifted, so had their connection. She had begun to see her mother's life choices not as limitations, but as expressions of values she herself was rediscovering. Community rootedness, practical wisdom, direct care for others. "I've been thinking about what you said about Jung's ideas on the mother archetype," her mom said, after they had caught up on family news. "How our relationship with our actual mother gets all tangled up with deeper patterns about nurturing and belonging. It's helped me understand some things about my own mother and about us." Their conversation unfolded with a new quality of mutual respect and curiosity, each recognizing the other as a full person on her own journey, rather than just a role or projection. After the call, Sarah sat on her balcony watching the city lights. Jung had written extensively about how healing individual relationships created ripples that extended outward, how personal integration contributed to collective wholeness. The changes in her life weren't dramatic by external standards. She still worked in tech, still lived in San Francisco, still navigated modern complexities. But the quality of her presence in these contexts had transformed, bringing a depth and intentionality that altered their meaning. The following morning, Sarah woke early and walked to a nearby park to watch the sunrise. Jung had often emphasized the psychological significance of natural cycles, how dawn, spring, and birth symbolized renewal and possibility in both nature and psyche. As golden light gradually illuminated the landscape, Sarah reflected on her journey over the past months. The emptiness that had once haunted her hadn't been banished. Jung would say that was impossible and undesirable, but it had been transformed from a void to be escaped into a creative space from which new life emerged. A quote from Jung came to mind: "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Modern life, with its technological acceleration, information overload, and constant disruption, created unique challenges for psychological development. But it also offered unprecedented opportunities for conscious choice, for integrating diverse perspectives, for creating new forms of community and meaning. The task wasn't to reject modernity, but to bring greater consciousness to how we shaped and were shaped by it. As the city awakened around her, Sarah felt a deep sense of connection to her own unfolding story, to the visible and invisible communities she was part of, to the ancient wisdom Jung had articulated, and the contemporary challenges he couldn't have foreseen. The journey toward wholeness wasn't a straight path with a final destination, but a spiral that continuously integrated new experiences into an expanding consciousness. And in this ongoing process of becoming more fully human amid modern complexities, she had found not the empty happiness promised by consumer culture, but something richer and more sustaining, a life of meaning, purpose, and authentic presence. As we come to the end of Sarah's journey, perhaps you recognize parts of yourself in her story. In a world that constantly pulls us outward toward achievement, distraction, and endless optimization, Jung reminds us of a profound truth. The most important journey is not the one we take through the external world, but the one that leads us back to our authentic selves. The emptiness so many of us feel today isn't a personal failing. It's a collective wound, the natural consequence of a society that has prioritized technological progress over psychological understanding, efficiency over meaning, connection over depth. We've built remarkable tools to connect with others, yet somehow feel more isolated than ever before. Jung understood that true fulfillment doesn't come from escaping our darkness or perfecting our personas. It comes from integration, embracing both our light and shadow, our rational minds and our symbolic souls, our individual uniqueness and our shared humanity. In a fragmented world, wholeness is the ultimate act of rebellion. Perhaps the emptiness you feel isn't something to be escaped or filled with more achievement, more consumption, more distraction. Perhaps it's a sacred space clearing within you, making room for something authentic to emerge. Perhaps it's not a void at all, but the beginning of your own journey toward wholeness. The path isn't easy. It requires courage to question collective assumptions, to look inward when everything pulls you outward, to embrace complexity in a world that demands simplicity. But in this journey lies the possibility of a life not merely successful by external standards, but deeply meaningful by the standards of your own soul. What parts of yourself have you left behind in your pursuit of success or acceptance? What deeper wisdom waits to be reclaimed? The journey toward wholeness begins with a single courageous step inward. And in a world that feels increasingly lost, perhaps that's exactly the journey we most need to take. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of modern life have left you feeling disconnected from your deeper self? What small steps might you take toward greater wholeness? Your perspective adds to our collective understanding, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If you found value in this exploration of Jung's ideas and their relevance to our modern struggles, please consider subscribing to this channel. Each week, we dive into psychological insights that help make sense of our complex world and discover paths toward more meaningful living. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of seekers and thinkers. Thank you for taking the time to explore these depths with me today. Your presence and attention are truly valued, and I'm grateful we could share this journey together. See you in the next video.